I've always been rather curious about why certain people learn better than others. And for myself, at least recently, I've been struggling to learn how to drive for my army stuff. And although me and my classmates take in the exact same information, the ability to retain this info and apply it in like practical sense, which is driving, of course, is vastly different. And the variability is so big that it can't be due to chance. And as someone who's also interested in learning sciences, of course, I had to like try to crack it. And as you can see, this little mental model diagram thing here, it's a very big simplification of what I perceive to be areas that can target. It's not the solution, or is the nor is it the problem, but it's how do I say? It's like a map of where you can target it. Later I'll explain. So every time we consume information, whether it's just like walking down the road, seeing trees, seeing a flashy car, or you're sitting in a lecture room, listening to a lecture, of course, hopefully not sleeping, you would take in information. Like whether you like it or not, you're taking in information right now. And if you take in all the information and it just stores in your brain will just explode. So as quickly as like a few milliseconds or some shit, the irrelevant information will be unprocessed and like thrown out. And what you're left with the relevant information. And for most of us, that's all we we might not even think of this step actually, but I will argue that most people think, oh, the moment the information is relevant, you just remember it and end of story. But here's just the beginning of the journey. And I'll argue that the main way we store the information is how it relates to our prior knowledge and how well the new logic and reasoning matches to it. Or like how this basically is what we usually say how well we understand things, but I broke it down to these two things. And prior knowledge is basically anything actually. Like for driving, the example I can use is that it's very similar to certain video games that my classmates have played, which I haven't, like GTA or some shit. And the skills and the knowledge from these different platforms have allowed them to understand this new logic and reasoning much more easily than me, who has zero experience in this field. And although the information they consumed before was is probably different also, it has helped them in understanding. That's the logic here. So this new logic and reasoning from the new information, the new theory, blend blended in well into the person's brain because of the prior knowledge. And yeah, of course also how well the person understands the new logic. And after all that processing, right, it's just your interpretation of that specific piece of info. That's it. And what you can do with it is this is just theoretical or declarative as some would say. It will go through another phase which is application or applying it in the real world. Or basically it's like challenging your beliefs if this was a belief, or testing out a learning method if this previous part is a learning method. And it goes through real world experience, all that shit. And as you use it or like just experience life, you will get certain feedback. Whether it's saying, oh, it's a mistake, or it's like a bit faulty but can change a bit, or completely wrong, or hey, it's pretty good or some shit. Then it will go back into actually it can go back to here also. Basically you reiterate your prior understanding of the same thing. So that becomes your new part of your new logic and reasoning, because this is like new. The feedback is new information essentially. So you understand you have a different interpretation of the newer logic and reasoning, and this cycle goes on and on and on. So for this feedback to be useful, I'd argue that you need a certain level of awareness first, and also a certain level of theoretical or declarative knowledge to even make sense of this awareness. So yeah, actually, I'll just add that. Yeah, that's much better. And this cycle will continue on and on and on. And another point is being that this part is what helps in retention, not just the like how to say it's when you apply the information, you don't just learn how to apply it more. You automatically retain it more because it's being recalled. Like the information will go through your brain again, essentially, without you having to go and quote unquote revise the notes. And that is probably the reason why some people need to revise notes more than others. Because the okay, here is the encoding. Actually this holding is the encoding. But this is the retrieval. So it depends on both. So how well you encoded, and if your encoding is not so good, how often you retrieve it and how well you retrieve it also. And it is also true that retrieval will help in your encoding skills. So yeah, that's that. And in the field of learning sciences, I just rephrase everything, and this is how I see it. How I see why me in the past, or heck, even me right now, might have interpreted certain learning techniques wrongly and certain learning principles also wrongly, and that has resulted in a bad feedback loop and the wrong method in the end, essentially, because I had a different focus on the same technique. I had different prior knowledge, and I interpreted the how and what the new technique works differently. And when I used the study method, my feedback was different, or like incorrect feedback, or no feedback actually, because I was not aware of it at that time. So it ended up in a vicious feedback loop. And I'd argue that this is way easier the bad feedback loop is easier to occur than the good one. So there's a few regions we can tackle this. This one, I think this is really tackled very well by the I Can Study community, which is feedback from experts or feedback from people who have mm, reached a higher level. And there's many ways to tackle this. Like every part of this can be like tackled individually. But I'm thinking hmm, like stuff like how to make information more relevant rather than irrelevant. Like regardless, some info will be irrelevant, no matter how well you put it. But how can we increase this? That's another way we can approach it. Or this is usually what people work on, which is explaining it better how or what like why it works, stuff like that. Like make it make the person feel that it is important to remember, not just because it's a test and or like it's just there. but genuinely feel the importance of this information. This is what people try to work on usually. This area, I would say, is it also can be worked on, which is we add like a prerequisite reading or like information beforehand, before people even go into this, which is another strategy I'm thinking today. But these are all just hypotheses. These are all just very fickle-minded plans. Because the moment this happens, it can be stopped here, definitely. But it'd be confusing to the person though. Cause it's like I did this method, I got a feedback that everything is wrong. But the way I see this and the way I have this merging together, it still produces this. Or a different version of this because you have new info from here. But how much can you actually change in one cycle or two? Even if, like, is it necessary to have a few cycles? It might be. But that's up for discussion. So yeah, that's basically my mind overthinking about this. And I think that this is actually pretty genius. But it's a work in progress, definitely work in progress. Like myself, yours truly. So with that being said, see you in the next video. Toodles.